everyone. Welcome back to Sourced by Cofactr, where we cut through the noise and get to the good parts. As always, I'm Ed Dodd. Great to have you joining us. So, you're building physical hardware, anything from complex medical devices to, say, ruggedized industrial sensors. Yeah, you definitely know the tension we want to talk about today. It's that classic push and pull between the perfect design from engineering and, well, the often painful reality of the supply chain. You've got engineering wanting, ultimate precision, maybe specialized tolerances, the newest parts, and then there's procurement trying to find those parts, make sure they're available long term, and crucially buy them now without signing some crazy NCNR clause or breaking the budget. That internal friction can be a silent killer for your margins, your timelines. But what's interesting is that it isn't like inevitable. That's the core idea. So here's some really concrete structured practices. Think of them as give and take agreements used by top tier OEMs. And these aren't just fuzzy cultural things, they're operational mandates, ways to bridge that gap between the design dream and supply chain reality, basically turning that friction into speed. Okay, structured give and take. Let's unpack these 10 practices. We're starting with maybe the highest stakes area, managing supply risk. Making sure the parts you design in are actually available when you need to build. And the first big strategic insight here is that the information has to flow much, much earlier in the process. So, practice number one is all about proactive supply risk assessment. Procurement's give here is committing to early NPI risk assessments for every potential part engineering is even considering. This means flagging things like potential end of life, EOL, last time buy status, spotting restrictive NCNR clauses, providing real lead time trend lines. And this info needs to land on the engineer's desk before that schematic gets locked. That sounds like a significant upfront investment from procurement, right? Analyzing parts that engineering might just discard anyway. How do you justify that? That's the take part. Engineering's commitment, their side of the bargain, is to actually design with flexibility in mind from the get go. They need to define what we might call flex zones right in the spec document. Acceptable temperature grades, maybe package variants that work on the same footprint, clear parametric envelopes that still meet all the safety and compliance needs. That way, procurement's early work isn't wasted because engineering has already agreed to build in the flexibility needed to act on those warnings. For example, procurement flags an MCU moving towards last time buy way early in the design. Because of that early heads up, engineering could pivot smoothly to a pin compatible sibling on a newer, healthier process node, avoiding a potential disaster down the road. That early flow sets up practice number two, qualified second sourcing. Here, procurement's give is actively curating a list of qualified second sources. Not just any alternative, but parts that are package compatible, pin compatible, and critically, providing the full compliance specs for whatever is needed right alongside the suggestion. And engineering's take is awareness. It means consciously avoiding those tempting single source parts unless there's a really robust pre qualified fallback path already defined and documented for that specific internal part number, IPN. You can't just hope your sole supplier stays in business forever. That shared accountability is key. We've all seen companies get absolutely burned when their only source for, say, a precision op amp just vanishes. In this model, the collaboration leads to maybe finding a qualified pair of parts, identical footprint, maybe slightly different specs, but both validated as backup. Okay, so we've talked general availability, second sourcing. What about those critical path parts? The MCUs, FPGAs, memory, the ones with really long lead times. How do top teams handle that inventory risk? That brings us to practice four, the long leads watch list. Procurement takes ownership here. They maintain this watch list of critical parts. Their proactive give is recommending strategic buffer buys. But, and this is crucial, those buys have to come with specific cancellation terms negotiated upfront. That's the safety net. Engineering side, their take is setting and sticking to really clear BOM maturity gates. They need to formalize those stages: proto, DV, design validation, PV, production validation, and finally PR, production, release. And just quickly for listeners, proto is usually your bench testing, DV is more structured, proving the design works, PV is often about compliance, manufacturability at scale, PR is the final go ahead. And engineering only authorizes those risky buffer buys based on hitting those gates. You don't pull the trigger on a big non cancelable memory buy until the design is stable enough at, say, the PV stage. You avoid that classic scenario where DDR lead times blow out during PV, but a minor tweak pushes back the final sign off. If procurement pre-stages those parts with return rights tied to that PV gate, you just avoided scrapping inventory and a 10-week delay. That's smart risk management. Okay, so once you've got a handle on supply resilience, the next big hurdle is often balancing that design precision against the cold hard reality of cost and lead time. This can happen, where engineering requirements sometimes add complexity, maybe unnecessarily, which leads us straight into practice number 3. Specs and tolerances. This can be a really tough internal conversation. Procurement's give is bringing hard data showing the actual cost and lead time differences for various specs. What's the real impact of demanding a 0.1% resistor versus a 1%, factoring in cost and availability? This is where you might see a real cultural shift needed. Engineering's take has to be a commitment to rigorously differentiate what's a genuine must have for safety or function versus a nice to have, or maybe just a legacy spec. They have to be willing to relax tolerances where system performance isn't actually tangibly affected. It sounds simple on the surface, but convincing an engineer to relax a tolerance, that takes trust and data. But the payoff can be huge. There was this great example with an ADC, an analog to digital converter. It had this super tight spec for integral nonlinearity, INL, basically conversion accuracy. That spec locked them into one supplier, created a 30-week lead time, just brutal. By actually running simulations and finding they could relax the INL spec slightly without harming the final product performance at all, they opened up dozens of suppliers. Lead time dropped to 8 weeks. That's a massive win from just communication. And knowing that cost versus spec reality feeds right into practice 7. Cost reality here, driven by component or manufacturing engineering after the design is validated. They proactively offer value engineering options, BE levers, design tweaks that cut cost without messing up validation. Maybe using smaller, more standard packages, for example. And procurement's take is delivering the true total cost of ownership, the TCO. Not just the unit price, but adding in assembly test costs, programming, logistics, tariffs, the whole picture. You need that holistic view. A cheaper part that doubles assembly time can actually be more expensive. Let's go back to an earlier example. Switching to a smaller MCU package might have faced resistance, but procurement showed that the smaller package enabled pre-programming, smarter trimming during assembly. It actually sped up the final assembly line, hit the COGS targets, all without adding design risk. That TCO view made the difference. And rounding out this section, practice 8, cross references. How do you allow flexibility but maintain safety and quality? Engineering's give is publishing crystal clear, unambiguous rules for substitutions, pin mapping, spec envelopes, pass-fail limits, really defining the guardrail. And procurement's take is accountability. They commit to only proposing cross-refs that strictly fit within those published rules. This stops that painful loop where procurement finds a cheap part, throws it over the wall, and engineering immediately rejects it because it misses one critical parameter: shared standards, clear boundaries. So we've covered best practices that really hit design intelligence, cost reality. Now let's talk about the procedural discipline needed to make these methods actually speed things up. We kick off with practice 5, the alternates fast track. For those unforeseen shortages, procurement commits to a specific service level agreement, an SLA, maybe 24 to 48 hours. Their give is speed, returning compliant alternates complete with pre-checked specs within that window. And engineering's take is defining exactly what makes an alternate qualify. For that fast track, setting specific rules up front for, say, LDOs, low dropout regulators. Maybe it's meeting defined voltage input-output current and dropout specs. For op amps, maybe hitting certain gain bandwidth and offset windows. Clear targets. Those definitions are crucial because engineering is essentially pre approving the acceptance criteria. So, what happens when an LDO goes NCNR mid build and procurement finds two compliant drop ins and gets the data back in 24 hours and they pass design validation testing without needing any firmware changes? That's speed unlocked by setting boundaries beforehand. Next practice, 6, engineering change order, ECO discipline. This one's huge for preventing costly scrap. Engineering's give is using formal ECO gates and critically requiring procurement sign off before it change invalidates active purchase orders. This can be tough for engineering teams who want to iterate quickly, but it links the design risk directly to the purchasing commitment. Procurement's take is then aligning PO terms, maybe flexible quantities and stage deliveries, to match those engineering gates. You prevent that nightmare of NCNR parts arriving just as a design change makes them useless. Okay, shifting gears slightly, what about when you have to source outside authorized channels? Unavoidable sometimes. That's practice 9, channel risk. Engineering, along with quality department, has to provide clear guidance here. Their give is defining when using non-franchisee or independent distributors is acceptable and crucially specifying the required quality tests. Things like X-ray inspection, decapsulation, and curve trace analysis to check for counterfeits or damage. This is all about managing counterfeit risk and ensuring quality isn't compromised by urgency. Procurement's take is strict adherence per sourcing ladder. Authorized distributors first, always, then vetted independent channels only under specific engineering approved urgent conditions, and only if those mandated quality tests are performed and documented. Quality assurance built into the emergency plan. And finally, let's hit practice 10, vendor onboarding, making it efficient to bring new suppliers online, like a contract manufacturer or a test house. Engineering's give here is standardizing data formats, CAD files, programming scripts, BOM formats, special process instructions. Make it consistent. Because when engineering provides that standardized data package, procurement's take is streamlining the onboarding. They can pre prepare NDAs, QMS checks, secure data transfer methods. It means a new printed circuit board house, for instance, gets onboarded fast and hits the ground running with good yield because the test files were clean and standardized from day one. Efficiency. So, we've walked through these 10 specific practices, these give and takes, but they don't happen in a vacuum. To really make them work, best in class OEMs adopt four kinds of foundational prerequisites, pillars, if you will, to achieve this collaborative speed. Okay, what are they? First pillar has to be a joint NPI kickoff, and not just sending a memo around. It means procurement and engineering actually sit down together, co owning a risk ranked bomb review before the schematic is released. If you don't ID the higher risk parts together early, you're already behind. Pillar number two, a single system of record, absolutely critical. One source of truth for everything. That IPN to MPN mapping, the approved vendor list, AVL, compliance docs, qualified alternates, all in one place. If that data is scattered across spreadsheets and personal hard drives, forget it. Collaboration will die right there. Third pillar, formal internal service level agreements, SLAs. We mentioned the 24-hour alternate desk, but this needs to be broader. Defining expected turnaround times for ECO approvals, for parametric checks, for anything requiring cross functional action. It turns a fuzzy request into a trackable commitment. And the fourth pillar, compliance by design. What does that mean? Baking quality standards like AS9100 or ISO 13485, regulations like ROS or REACH, directly into the part selection tools right at the start. You filter out non compliant parts before they even have a chance to get onto a draft schematic. Okay, so pulling it all together, what does this mean for you? Let's really hammer home the goal here. When these 10 practices and 4 pillars become standard practice, the payoff is massive. Fewer redesigns late in the game, much faster build cycles, better margin control. You essentially trade that internal friction and information hoarding for clear, measurable operational speed. The real difference between constant supply chain delays and achieving a strategic advantage seems to boil down to having these concrete shared expectations, these give and takes, and maintaining that single source of trusted data. Which leaves us with a final thought. Maybe something for you to consider about your own operations. If you were to really audit your current designs, how much hidden cost, how much supply chain inflexibility is currently locked up in requirements that were set maybe years ago? Requirements that were never really challenged, never clearly defined as must have versus nice to have. And perhaps more importantly, what's the immediate strategic value you could unlock just by revisiting those assumptions and creating that flexibility today? All right, then, that's all for today. Thank you for joining me on Sourced by Cofactr. I'm Ed Dodd. I hope we cut through some noise and helped you get to the good parts. If you found this episode valuable, please subscribe and follow Cofactr for more hardware insights. Leave your questions in the comments and sign up for our newsletter at cofactr.com.